In April of 1940, then Prime Minister of Italy, Benito Mussolini, recalled and destroyed all available copies of the Doctrine of Fascism. Why did he do that? In this video, we're going to explore the reasons why Mussolini destroyed and recalled his Doctrine of Fascism in 1940. So first, we must check the most reputable, trustworthy website in the world, Wikipedia. So let's take a look at the Wikipedia entry for the Doctrine of Fascism. You can see here. So let's check what Wikipedia has said about why Mussolini might have retracted this Doctrine of Fascism. So we scroll down here to the bottom where it says, in 1940, Mussolini ordered all remaining copies of the document, which had different editions and translations, to be retracted because he changed his mind about certain points. Let's pay close attention to the quote here. It says, because he changed his mind about certain points, quote, unquote. Okay, so if we click on 2, we will see it says Neil O'Sullivan, Fascism, London, Dent, 1983. Okay, let's track that down. Click on it. Neil O'Sullivan, page 138, referencing. And then he references another book, Mussolini's Roman Empire, by the English scholar Max Smith, Penguin edition, 1979. So we have 2 sources that they're referencing the fact that he retracted the Doctrine of Fascism because he changed his mind about certain points. So here's what we're going to have a problem here. So let's take a look at the O'Sullivan book to see exactly what it says. Okay, so it says here, Mussolini did not act inconsistently. Therefore, when he recalled and destroyed all available copies of the Doctrine of Fascism in 1940, after he had had second thoughts about certain phrases in it. Okay, hold on. Wait just a minute. That's not what it says here in the Wikipedia quote. It says in 1940, Mussolini ordered all remaining copies of the document, which had different editions. That's not what O'Sullivan said about different editions. And translation, again, O'Sullivan doesn't say this, to be retracted because he changed his mind about certain points. Click on number 2 and you'll see it references only Neil O'Sullivan. So where, if you see here, you see again where it says Mussolini did not act inconsistently. Therefore, when he recalled and destroyed all available copies of the Doctrine of Fascism in 1940, after he had had second thoughts about certain phrases. So as you can see here, the quote does not match at all with O'Sullivan. It's not even the same. O'Sullivan says destroyed, whereas Wikipedia says it had retracted and he changed his mind, which doesn't even say that in the O'Sullivan edition. And also another egregious mistake here is that they mention the different editions and translations with only referencing O'Sullivan. So you can see here, okay, so now let's check Dennis Mack Smith's Mussolini's Roman Empire edition. Mack Smith, he says his Mussolini Doctrine of Fascism had also been published lavishly in 18 different languages, but all the available copies were recalled and destroyed in April 1940 when the author had second thoughts about certain crucial phrases. Is that the same as what Wiki says? Still not the same as what Wiki says. So if you were to find out why Mussolini changed his mind about the Doctrine of Fascism and you decided to look at the Wiki page, solve this conundrum here, you would be at a complete loss. You wouldn't know where to look. You would click on 2 and it would go right down to O'Sullivan's book with no mention of Smith's book. But Smith's book mentions the different translations and the different editions, whereas the Wiki quote says that there are different editions and translations, but only citing O'Sullivan as the source. And of course, you cannot click on the O'Sullivan link to the book Fascism, Modern Ideologies. Besides, that's not what the name of the book is called. The original book was called Modern Ideologies, Fascism, published in January 1st, 1984 by Neil O'Sullivan. And it also says Fascism, Everyman's University's Paperbacks. Sorry, there are no links. You have to purchase the book on Amazon. So what does it really mean to be left or right wing? What is the left-right spectrum or right-left spectrum? I think that ideas of left and right are sort of vague, general, too ambiguous. But I think it depends also maybe on the status quo, what the status quo wants you to believe versus what reality really is. And that certainly helps us shape these differences between left and right. So I think if we can look at this chart here from Killing History, the False Left-Right Political Spectrum by L.K. Samuels, we might get a little better idea or better picture about what is left-wing or right-wing. I think we can have a better understanding then of where Mussolini is coming from. Is he coming from the left or to the right? According to L.K. Samuels, in his book Killing History, he describes the left-right spectrum in Chart A as coming from original political spectrum from the first stage of the French Revolution. Comparison there has both classical liberals and libertarians can be considered the free left. As you can see here, the left, open, individual, liberty, no government, according to the French Revolution there, and the right, closed, authoritarian, total government. However, according to Chart B, the result from the socialist and Marxist stealing the left-wing political designation from classical liberals and condemning any opponent as, quote, right-wing, according to Mussolini in his 1933 Political and Social Doctrine of Fascism, fascism was on the left. He had been an avowed Marxist for almost 2 decades. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Political and Social Doctrine of Fascism, which was translated in English by Jane Soames, who was a British-born author, translator, and historian. She translated the first known English translation of this in 1933. So according to Mussolini here, in the Political and Social Doctrine of Fascism, he says on page 19, given that the 19th century was a century of socialism, of liberalism, and of democracy, it does not necessarily follow that the 20th century must also be a century of socialism, liberalism, and democracy. Political doctrines pass, but humanity remains, and it may rather be expected that this will be a century of authority, a century of the left, capital L, a century of fascism. For if the 19th century was a century of individualism, liberalism always signifying individualism, it may be expected that this will be the century of collectivism, and hence the century of the state. It is a perfectly logical deduction that a new doctrine can utilize all the still vital elements of previous doctrines. So how does that really fit in with the left-right spectrum? Well, let's refer back to our chart here, where according to Chart B, right-left spectrum, the results from the socialists and Marxists stealing the left-wing political designation from the classical liberals and condemning any opponent as right-wing. The right, according to this new spectrum, would be open, individual liberty. Well, that's not what Mussolini says. He didn't believe in individual liberty. Mussolini would be, according to this chart on the left, closed and authoritarian, a total government. So that does certainly fit in with what Mussolini believed. It also fits in with his also right-wing leanings, which would be Mediterranean nationalism. Just plain, everyday, patriotic nationalism. That would be considered of the right. But of the left, he's definitely authoritarian and total government. What I'm saying is that Mussolini does fall on the left, and the origins of fascism, as we will see in the next section in this video, does fall on the left side of the spectrum, according to the right-left spectrum that we just learned about, being left authoritarian, statism, collectivism, and not of the right would be individual liberty. But Mussolini does fall on the right, and this is my point I'm trying to make about nationalism, is that, yes, he was nationalistic, just Mediterranean nationalism. He was not nationalism the same as Hitler. Hitler was more racial nationalism, but Mussolini was just of the right being just nationalism and definitely of left. That's the point I'm trying to make here, is that Mussolini was both left and right. But his origins is definitely of the left. And let's not forget that according to his talks with Emil Ludwig, that Mussolini, yes, indeed, used to wear a medallion around his neck with a picture of Marx on it. And this is the key maybe to understanding why he may have changed his mind or had a change of heart and destroyed his doctrine of fascism. Is that every dictator, including Hitler and Mussolini, all of them, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Che Guevara, Castro, all of them had an affinity for Marxism. Fascism, what is it? Well, we're going to do a brief summary of what it is, and we're going to look at next a marvelous book, and I highly recommend this book called Mussolini, A New Life by Farrell. In this book, he describes fascism as a mass movement which was against class war for class collaboration. Born in the trenches of the Great War, out of feelings of anger, ennui, impotence, isolation, and perplexity, the causes of which were the cruelty of laissez-faire capitalism and the death of certainty, both religious, theory of evolution, scientific, theories of relativity, the subconscious, chaos, and political failure of democracy and monarchy. Fascism was left-wing in origin, but the terms left and right are impossible to apply to fascism in power. It was neither, even though it was described itself as right-wing. He continues, fascism, the fascist method of brittling, as Mussolini put it, capitalism with the corporate state, which called the third way between capitalism and communism. In 1932, he told Ludwig in his talks with Mussolini that the fascist state directs and controls the entrepreneurs, whether it be in the fisheries or in the heavy industries or in the Val d'Asota. There, the state actually owns the mines. All the same, this is not socialism, for we do not want to establish a monopoly in which the state does everything. We term it state intervention, hence state corporatism. If anything fails to work properly, the state intervenes. In November 1934, he admitted that the corporate state was still and only in its experimental stage. So a couple of things here, which is interesting to note, that since fascism was a mass movement, which was against class warfare for class collaboration. Now, two things there. We have class warfare. He wanted to eliminate class. Mussolini wanted to eliminate class. But he also advocated for class collaboration, meaning the collaboration between the employers and the employees in the state corporate system or syndicate or trade union. That's basically what a syndicate is a trade union. And also you can see here that he was against capitalism, hence why he would be more left-wing in origin. Now, there's a misnomer here I'd like to point out where he says capitalism was the corporate state. Well, that can't be right because capitalism, by its definition, is individualism, and that is incompatible with the corporate state because corporate and state are the same thing. Corporate, corpus, a body of people, a state, a body of people. A corporate state makes sense, but it does not make sense with capitalism because capitalism is about the individual, the private. But let's take him at his word. Capitalism was the corporate state, which was called the third way between capitalism and communism. Now that's a key feature here. I need to point out here that Mussolini was a third way between communism and capitalism. Why? Because after World War I, people feared the Red Peril. So Mussolini was against communism, materialistic communism, but he advocated a spiritual communism, thus a spiritual state or religion. That's why Mussolini considers fascism to be a religion. Added to which, the king, by appointing Mussolini as the premier of Italy, that he would restore law and order. So we have restoring law and order, staving off socialism, the Red Peril, and creating stability in the European region. Here's another thing of note that I found interesting. All the same, this is not socialism. For we do not want to establish a monopoly in which the state does everything. We want to establish a state intervention. Therefore, state corporatism. He continues, if anything fails or doesn't work properly, the state intervenes. Now, this is very interesting because if you look at what Mussolini is saying here, that all the same, this is not socialism, for we do not want to establish a monopoly in which the state does everything. We term it state intervention. Now, this is what you have happening in America. You have state corporatism, where the state is literally intervening with, for example, Twitter. If you know anything about the Twitter files fiasco there, you see that the state had actually interfered with in Twitter's business to censor people. That's state intervention. So yes, this is not socialism, but it's not capitalism either. It's a third way. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. Now I want to point out something else. He continues, in November 1934, Mussolini admitted that the corporate state was still only in its experimental stage. Now that's important to understand why, and we can glean as to why Mussolini may have destroyed all remaining documents of the Doctrines of Fascism, because of this idea of experimental stage. And that moves us on to our final section. In this last section, I will briefly summarize some of Mussolini's ideas about the myth of the state and also the ever-changing revolution. Nicholas Farrell goes on to say, politically, D'Annunzio, the John Baptist of fascism, was an extremist, but he cannot be classified as either extreme left or extreme right wing. Like Mussolini, D'Annunzio was very right-wing when it came to the idea of Italian greatness, but veered left when it came to social policy. Continuing on, the appeal of both was the appeal of the cult, the appeal driven more by emotion than by reason. They succeeded because they were able to create a myth which moved men into actions. Now moving on to another textbook called Talks with Mussolini by Emil Ludwig, and they talk about this mystical influence upon the masses. Mussolini continues, the reasons are different, however. We need to speak of a permanent revolution because the phrase exerts a mystical influence upon the masses. Again, there's that term myth or mystical. It is stimulating, too, for persons of higher intelligence. When we talk of permanent revolution, we imply that the times are exceptional, and we give the man in the street a feeling that he is participating in an extraordinary movement. The actual fact is that construction begins right away. Continuing on, the course to be taken by a revolution cannot be accurately predicted. Its outlines are continually reshaping themselves. Thinkers and poets are like stormy petrels. They feel that a storm is brewing, but do not know from what quarter the wind will blow or what changes it will induce. And this is a very common thread you find throughout Mussolini's works, is this idea of the malleable, mystical, and mythical Weltanschauung or worldview to inspire the masses or influence the masses into a permanent revolution. This is why I believe he never wanted to write his Doctrine of Fascism, because of this belief of this artistic, mystical, mythical, spiritual thing, this sort of amorphic thing that exists to inspire people, to move them, to get them into action. And this is where he marries the idea of the thought and the action as well. But I don't want to go too deep into that one. The main thrust of this is that to show that Mussolini, he destroyed his Doctrine of Fascism because this was to set in stone the belief of fascism, and he didn't believe to set it in stone. He believed it was to be malleable and ever-changing for a permanent revolution. Now here's one final reference about poetry. When Ludwig asks Mussolini, I gather then that you believe in the kinship between the poet and the statesman, a kinship I have myself so often detected when studying these two types. Do you think it is possible that the dramatist can pave the way for the statesman? Here is the creative idea, the mystical idea. Do you believe that in general a playwright is the herald of a revolution? Mussolini says, beyond question. First, as a thinker and as a man, with a richly developed imagination, the poet is almost always a prophet as well. The mirror of the gigantic shadows which futurity casts upon the present. Dante is a single instance of this. He foreshadowed the liberation of the mind, which was then about to begin. But in one aspect, I differ from you. A poet is not the herald of a specific revolution. I think he meant to say heralded, not the sign of a revolution. When he refers to the poet as not the herald, he said heralded of a specific revolution, because the course to be taken by a revolution cannot be accurately predicted, and we do not know. We don't know anything yet. Its outlines are continually shaping or reshaping themselves. They're constantly changing. It's malleable. And this is why he destroyed his doctrine of fascism, as I believe it, because he didn't want to set this in stone. It had to be constantly shaping. We don't know what's going to happen, right? The course to be taken by a revolution cannot be accurately predicted. This is typical when you hear about critical race theorists, too. You ask them, well, what's the future to be, the solution? They don't know. Mussolini as well, typical Marxist. I don't know. I don't know what it is to be, because it's constantly changing itself. It's this sort of amorphic, mystical thing. You can't put your finger on it anywhere. It's always there to push you, to influence you, to garner in you the sense of a revolution, a spiritual revolution. As you can see here throughout this whole video, that we've started out with the false left-right political spectrum, or false left-right dichotomy, and how the Marxists stole the left-wing political designation from the classical liberals post-French Revolution. We've also learned what fascism is, which is state intervention, state corporatism, a third way, a third positionist. We also learned why he destroyed, or at least my opinion, why Benito Mussolini, the Prime Minister of Italy, destroyed the Doctrines of Fascism, which, by the way, had 18 different translations. So it's very universal, and Mussolini believed that fascism was universal and growing in universal popularity. And people like Oswald Mosley and what was going on in France and even in America to a certain degree, he was using it as this proof that fascism is spreading all around the world. Now, why did he destroy the doctrine? I believe it's because he didn't want to have a doctrine in the first place. And because he didn't have a doctrine, the philosopher Croce complained that Mussolini originally had not required any doctrine at all. Since his success in 1919 to 22 was due less to any ideas of his own, which Mussolini did not really have any ideas of his own. He borrowed a lot from D'Annunzio in the Fiume, sort of what you say, the March on Rome, or the precursor to the March on Rome, the Fiume thing. You can read about that if you like separately. Was due to less of his ideas of his own, Mussolini, his own ideas, than to the shortcomings of his rivals. Well, I think the rivals had some shortcomings too. Some of them were weak, some of them were a little more extreme, and some of them were just useless. In such a situation, the absence of any doctrine was actually an advantage. Of course, yeah, if you don't have any doctrine, you can't really hold anyone to anything. You know, you don't have anything like a Communist Manifesto or a Mein Kampf or anything like that. So no one can really hold you down, because since it even led to an enemy of fascism like Croce, for example, to conclude that because fascism was devoid of a doctrine, it was therefore innocuous. So yes, of course, because it was based on what they call the messianic mission, or the mythical mission of the Weltanschauung. And so Croce was one of many who complained about the lack of doctrine. And I think the reason why Mussolini wrote his doctrine in 1932, actually, the first publication was in 32 in English. He wrote it down because he wanted to put some sort of air of legitimacy to the Doctrines of Fascism, because they were celebrating the 10th year anniversary of fascism from 1922, October, to 1932. And to go back and reiterate the fluidity of this messianic mission, or this mythical Weltanschauung, it consists in the essentially fluid and dynamic conception of life and the world which fascism sought to impose to both liberal and socialist political theory, as well as to the traditional forms of conservative ideology, because Mussolini was neither left nor right. He was both a third positionist. Mussolini was left-wing in origin, but became a little more right-wing through milquetoast, vanilla nationalism, Mediterranean nationalism, and combined the two and what you might call National Socialism, but not the same as Hitler's National Socialism, which was based on race. So that's basically my point, because it had fluidity. It was unpredictable, according to Mussolini in his talks with Ludwig. This video was not meant to be any kind of final be-all or end-all to the controversies surrounding left, right, or whether Mussolini was or wasn't of the left or the right, or whether the English translation was correct or a mistranslation of left and right. It was to continue the debate. And that's the point of these controversies, to create sort of historical revisionism. And because history lies at the heart of the debate. So hopefully we'll keep this debate going. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section below about any mistakes. I'll be glad to correct those mistakes. And please support me on Subscribestar if you found this video helpful, or if you enjoy any of my other videos. And that's all, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. But wait, there's one more thing. I'd like to recommend a book. If you'd like to learn more about the myth of a Weltanschauung, or the mythical messianic mission, and you'd like to continue in this vein of the myth of the state, I would recommend a book by Ernst Cassirer called The Myth of the State. Link in the description box below. Bye-bye.